Well, good day, my friends. Welcome again to Carpo's channel. Today, the subject at hand is police. So I've actually planned on making this for a couple of days now, and I've had a few thoughts in my head. When I have an idea for a video, sometimes I'll just make the video, but usually I wait a day or two and process some of the thoughts, because there's always something that seems to get lost in translation and something that gets omitted or left out accidentally, and sometimes it's one of the most important concepts or ideas about the subject. I'm not here to bash police, nor am I here to support police or bash those who, let me just put it this way. I've read enough threads on videos about police beatings and excessive use of force to see that there seems to be a division among the public. There are the people who say, well, the police have to use their own rationale and they shouldn't be so forceful in their tactics, especially today. But there's a segment of the population which has the attitude of, well, if you don't commit crimes, you won't get in trouble. And if you get shot, then you must have done something wrong. And you must have not been obeying the officer's commands. Now, that's total bullshit, for lack of a better term. Policing is a very difficult job, I understand that, but that's not really the issue at hand here. Policing is not even one of the most dangerous jobs. It's not even in the top 10 most dangerous jobs. And many of the officer-related deaths, or those who die while on duty, like I heard one fella say, if somebody chokes on a ham sandwich while they're on duty, that's considered an officer, killed in the line of duty. And many of these statistics are completely skewed in order to be in favor of the police. Now, the reason I'm making this video isn't to sit and bash police and talk about how corrupt and dirty they are, because I think we already know that enough police are dirty. But it's not that all cops are dirty. And maybe it's just that I want to give a little bit of a voice to the good cops out there. If you're a good cop, and you're surrounded by bad cops, I'm sorry to use the bad apple analogy, but you will be pulled into the corruption, or else you'll be forced out of the force, for lack of a better term. You have to abide by the traditions of your chosen profession, let's say. And police haven't always been exactly the most upstanding citizens. The public has trust issues with the police, and that's why I'm talking about this, because I don't believe that police need to be completely abolished, and nor do I realize that there's a segment of the population which is kept in check by having a police force, and that the police were not just forced upon the public, but rather the public said, we need a way to protect ourselves even when we're not watching. We want to feel safe in our homes and in our neighborhoods. And traditionally, this is what the police would do. They would look for trouble, and they would deal with that trouble if necessary. But they weren't just seeking out anybody who looked suspicious, or trying to, find any particular flaw they could in order to arrest a person, which is just what I see happening so often. The police are public servants, okay? They're here to serve the public. And what happens is it gets very confused when a police officer, for example, won't uphold the laws in their own state. And they say, well, it's because it goes against the Constitution, or it goes against my own personal beliefs. And I hear this more and more often lately. As far as I'm concerned, if an officer says publicly, I'm not going to uphold this law, he should be fired on the spot. He was put in that job, positioned by the people to uphold the laws that the people want upheld. Now, this is, of course, in theory. The way it really works is, over a period of time, the police end up standing up for the rich and the corporations, which have the money to fight back if anything, were to go against them. In other words, a police pulls over a rich man, he's much less likely to harass that rich guy, even if the guy's a complete asshole. Why? Because he knows that the guy has clout. He has money. He could go to court and he could actually get the officer fired because, the guy has a voice in the community. Whereas you pull over a poor guy in a beat-up old car smoking, and, I grew up in an area where every single car that had any type of rust or dirt on it was pulled over. Every single car I saw pulled over in that town obviously was an older car or more beat up. And the police there would tell us they would do that. You know, that's how they profiled. I'm going to go over a couple of the biggest issues that I have with police. The first one would be planting evidence. You know, it's bad enough that we're trying to seek out and that the police are out there trying to find things that may or may not be there. But when you ask, you know, say, well, I can't find anything here, and you plant evidence in order to make a case, to me that is just one of the most disgusting things that I can picture an officer doing. That is so shameful, and as far as I'm concerned, administrative leave is not good enough for some of these people. They deserve to be fired completely, and not just that, but punished and sent to prison for their crimes. It would be a crime to bear false witness on your own people that you took an oath to uphold. And as I said, they will also harass the poor, the dirty, anybody who doesn't have a voice. Now this is often, this is a difficult one, because often some of the poorest or some of the most crimes that are committed in the poorest parts of town by poorer people who are trying to sell drugs to make money or whatever it may be. So it's not like we can say that, you know, all poor people are innocent. It's not about poorness, and I hate even using that term. You know, I'm thinking the ghetto, or you know, in the crappier parts of town. And but there's another side to this. The worse a town or an area is, often the less the police will patrol it. And there are even areas where the police won't go in down in Southern California. And what does that tell you? Well, some of the areas that need the most protection, cops have just given up on. One of the, I think the biggest issue that I have right now with what's going on with the police is civil forfeiture. And this is, of course, beyond the physical abuse of power, but one of the more unknown is, you know, and less discussed issues is civil forfeiture. Now, I've been through this before. I've had all my stuff taken, because I had a couple pot plants when I was younger. And they took and confiscated and kept all of my things, and probably burned them or auctioned them off. Civil forfeiture says that if a police officer arrests you, and you have drugs, and they believe you're selling those drugs, then you will forfeit your property. Because if they can prove that it was bought with, theoretically, with the drugs. The problem is that it doesn't matter. If a cop isn't, if it's a state where pot is illegal, and a cop goes into your house and he finds an ounce of pot, he will arrest you, and he will charge you, and he can even take your house over that pot. And he will take your car, your house, and when I was busted, I had the cops threatening to take not just my stuff, but they told me if I didn't rat out some other people or help them out, they could take my mom's car and her condominium and everything else. Now, this wasn't my first experience with police, but this was my first time going to jail. And I told the cops to stick it up their ass, basically. I said, you think I'm going to rat somebody else out to save my own hide? No, that's exactly what's wrong with, you know, rats. Narcs to me are just some of the, you know, most conniving, dirty people out there. Because, of course, that goes into the drug issue, which is for another time. There was an issue recently, I believe in Tennessee, where there was a, I can't remember, maybe it was Georgia. But there's a well-known area, a highway, where drugs come up from Mexico and they travel up to New York. And what they found out was that these police teams, these drug task forces over there, they were watching the other side of the freeway. Not the side with the drugs coming in, but they were focusing all their attention on the cars going out, because that's where the money went. So here's the thing. If you confiscate drugs as a police force, those drugs go into evidence, and there's not much you can do. You can take some, you can sell them on your own. But if you're a cop, you want money if you're a dirty cop. So they would spend all their time on the other side, pulling over cars and arresting people and searching their cars to try to find the drug money. And then the cops would take it, because civil forfeiture, and here's the thing a lot of people don't know, in a lot of areas, if cops seize your money, they use it for their own police force, or at least get a huge percentage of it for their police force, so they can further militarize and further seek out more money. And so the police become a separate entity of their own. Well, there have been a couple sting operations on the police where they pulled over people who, this one kid recently who was traveling with money, he was traveling down to California to, he'd saved all his money from his job, and he was traveling down to buy a place or a car, whatever it was. And the police seized thousands and thousands of dollars of his money. And he claimed that he told what it was for, he had all the proof of what it was for, it didn't matter. And it turns out after they investigated, there were a lot more cases just like this, of people, just average citizens, with nondescript cars who basically the cops pulled them over and just harassed them into saying, do you have any money? That's the first question they asked them. Do you have any money in the car? Do you have any money in the car? And it's just disgusting. It's the Gestapo. It's a frickin', it's like a terrorist organization, some of these cop forces. And the more they divide into these drug task forces, the worse it is. And to me, I believe all drugs should be legal, because the problem is that by keeping drugs illegal, it doesn't lessen the amount of people that use them. All it does is makes it harder for police to know what's going on, harder for the people to know where the good products are, causes more deaths, and just it's a huge problem, and it costs a lot of money. It's a big waste of resources. One of the other issues I have with police is shoot first and ask questions later. And within that realm, there are cover-ups aplenty. We've all heard stories of police who have hidden drugs on people or guns on people after they died, who have been caught planting a weapon, on someone. Now think about it. These are just the cops that got caught. How hard would it really be to plant a weapon on somebody? Not hard at all. And I'm sure there are plenty of cops out there who carry guns with them every day on the job, a nondescript gun. Perhaps they took off a killer or somebody else that they can just, if they need it, they can use it to plant for evidence, because it happens. So therefore, there are police who do this. And it's disgusting to me. It's just absolutely disgusting. If you make a mistake, you pay the price for that mistake. If you shoot an unarmed civilian who was just holding a cell phone, you can't use the excuse of, I thought he had a weapon. And a lot of people would disagree with that, but that's how I feel. The police, the average citizen may be dangerous to a police officer if they don't know. But the police took that job. The police took an oath to uphold a higher standard than the average citizen. That they were going to act on their best accordance and follow the law. And unfortunately, this isn't what's happening. And it's making people angry at the cops. And it's caused these groups like Cop Block and these other, basically these little groups that go out and they try to film cops doing things wrong. And to me, I find that if you're filming an officer doing something wrong, I think that's a great thing. We should always film cops if they're doing something in order to make sure that they're on the up and up. And a lot of cops do not like this. And a lot of cops don't know their own laws. And they think that you can't film an officer. And yes, you can film an officer. And you can film in a public area. But when you grab a video camera and you go down to the police station and you start filming around and walking around, and then the cops follow you and ask you what you're doing, and you say, oh, you don't have any right to question me, and I don't have to give you my ID. This is the kind of thing that just makes people look stupid. This is the kind of the things where the cops are calm and collected and they're like, look, sir, we just want to know what you're doing here. And the guy is basically obsessed with his rights, trying to prove something just so he can upload a YouTube video to get a lot of views. I think those things are really cutting into, the real issues with police. If you're going out trying to make a cop get mad at you, that's different than filming a cop who is abusing his power. And remember, they are people too, okay? And police, one key component of police officers that I've noticed, and maybe some of you have seen differently, is that they often don't know their own law. And if a citizen does know a specific law, and they tell the officer, well, actually, this is legal, you can look it up, and they know the statute or the particular number for it, the ordinance. Never have I seen an officer say, well, you know what, I guess you were right, I was wrong. It's really that simple. And I thought about this the other day. I thought, I have never heard a cop say, I'm sorry for bothering you. No, they get cocky, and if you call them out on it, then they just walk away and try to make you feel like the idiot. But you know what? One thing that you may not know is that, and this is sad, even though police lie for each other and they're like a family, this is something that you would expect with any company, right? If an outside company comes in and they start harassing you, you stick with your company. But the police are held to a different standard because we are their company. We are the ones they're supposed to support. But When I found out that police were not allowed to become officers if they were too intelligent, I was kind of taken back by that, and I had to really look into this. It was about a year or two ago, but I found out, yes, indeed, an IQ test can prevent you from becoming a police officer, not because you're too dumb, but because you're too smart. And I won't go into the details. You can look it up yourself. It was pretty fascinating. I think it was the New York City Police Department. But I'm not saying that cops aren't intelligent. I'm just saying that if you're too smart, they don't want you in there. And that to me is kind of disturbing. It shows a pattern of wanting to... Their reasoning is that they believe if somebody's too intelligent, that they will get bored with being a police officer, or it won't work out for them. And my belief is that somebody who's too intelligent upholds the law and will expose their own fellow officers and has a conscience. Not always, but it is a strange thing. So anyhow, I understand that being a police officer is a tough job, and I've spent the first half of this video just saying, you know, talking about all the problems with cops, but that's not really my aim here. I understand that peer pressure and the bad apples issue means that if even a couple cops are crooked, it's really hard for other cops to turn in a fellow cop for doing something. I mean, I can't even imagine, but it's the oath you took, and that's the thing. You made a promise to the people, and you need to uphold that promise, regardless of how you feel about your brothers, because your brothers also work for the public. Brothers and sisters, pardon. So, how does this happen? Well, I'd say that one of the biggest culprits right now to how officers are viewed and how officers view the public is cop dramas and cop TV shows. I hate CSI, all these NCIS, all these shows about cops. I've never watched them. I can't stand them. I cannot stand watching cops on television say, well, we can't get this legally, so we're going to have to break the law. It has become the norm for police on TV to lie, cheat, steal, kill their way through. Now, I'm not saying that this reflects what's really going on in the police everywhere. I'm just saying that this is what people see on television. And the fact that people watch that and still support these officers and feel in their minds that, well, yeah, sometimes you got to break the law in order to catch a criminal. I don't agree with that. I do not agree with that. If you're trying to bust a criminal because they're breaking the law, and you have to break a law to get that criminal, you are just as guilty as they are. I don't care what laws you break, because you took an oath to uphold the law. There are judges who say that they won't follow the law because they don't believe in this, or a local officer up here that says he won't uphold the recent firearms law that passed because he doesn't believe it's constitutional. Here's the thing, you don't get to have an opinion as a cop about the law. You can have an opinion, but you still have to uphold that law, and that becomes a very difficult gray area. I'm not saying what's right or wrong. I mean, but if you're going to uphold constitutional laws, you know, perhaps the right for a human to live in safety and security means that you shouldn't be busting people for smoking a joint on the corner, you know, or in their own house. So the police shows, they have completely, you know, they made cops look like dirty is the norm. And I find that's a big problem. The public trust is abused, and therefore we come up with things like Cop Block, where people can upload directly to the internet. People are live streaming these incidents, and of course it makes police nervous. I can understand that, but there's a reason for why it's happening. Because if you have ever been wronged by a policeman, and you've ever been profiled or treated like crap, then you would understand. And if you haven't, then you're probably along the lines of, well, the police are just out to help us. There's people who, if a cop's nearby, they feel safe. I don't know any, because if a cop gets behind me on the road, even if I'm totally legal, I get paranoid. I'm nervous. I expect to get pulled over. And I thought about this. I thought, why do I expect to get pulled over? Why am I scared of cops? Even though I respect them, I've had pretty good interactions because I can talk to people. I don't drive wasted, you know. I mean, I haven't talked to a cop in a while, but this morning I was thinking about a couple of issues that I came across in my own life that happened to me. And one of them was, of course, when I was younger, I was a long-haired, hippie pot smoker dude, drove a Volkswagen bus, and I lived in a little town called Lake Oswego, which was kind of like a yuppie little area. And we lived in the poorer part of it, but I went to the school and drove bus around the town with all these yuppies. And the cops pulled me over a few times. And I remember one time the cops pulled me over with a bunch of people in my bus. I had tinted windows, so they didn't know who was in there, but I asked him what he pulled me over for, and he said, well, I pulled you over because your windows are too dark of a tint. And I was like, that's not true, actually. This is considered a van, and I went over the law with him, and he's like, yeah, well, okay, whatever. He goes back to his car, and then he comes back and he goes, oh, I'm writing you a tag for obscured tags, because my license plate frame was a slight bit over one of my tags. And I remember I was about 17, I think, and I remember telling the cop, I said, why are you harassing me? And I knew the cop, he was a local cop. And he goes, I'm not harassing you. If I was harassing you, you'd know it. I'd tow your car, or something like that. And that's just like, played the power trip with me. And I was like, I know you're pulling me over because it's a Volkswagen bus. You know I live here in this town. You know who I am. You just want to see if it smells like pot or something. And I just got sick of that kind of crap. We'd go down to the park, and cops would always come over and talk to us, see what we're up to, what are we doing, even though they knew who we were. It wasn't like they were questioning who are these new people. It's like, can we bust these guys today? But for the most part, they were pretty cordial and respectful. One of the cops even told me, hey, you guys smell like the bottom of a hookah out here. But, and they left us alone some of the time. So this is why I do respect cops. I got pulled over in Lake Oswego, driving to work. I was in this bus, or in my old pickup. I had expired tags, so I had a spare tag, and I put it over. I actually put a tag on the license plate illegally, I think, or maybe the person who I bought it from had, I don't even remember. But I know that it wasn't registered, and I had a tag. And I stop at this stop sign, I'm looking for this place to go work, and I pack this bowl, and I take a huge toke off of it, and then I look in my rearview mirror, and there's an undercover cop behind me. Put the pipe down, drive up the street. Anyway, he pulls me over up the street a ways, has me get out, searches my car, smells like weed, of course, finds my joints in there and stuff, and my pipe, and has me on the hood, and then he gets a call. And then he says, all right, you drive safe, make sure you don't put that stuff away. And he's like, I get in my car, I'm like, thanks, officer, and he leans out, he goes, don't forget your pipe, it's on the hood. So I grabbed my pipe and I left. So I'm giving you that example of my good interactions with cops. There are good cops out there, and I totally respect them. I think that they may even be the majority. I don't know. I don't know the statistics on cops, because they're just people, They're just people. And so many of them, it's like some of the cops are better people than the people who are out there trying to expose the cops. In other words, some of these dirty people who want to drive around and be like, oh, I want to expose dirty cops, and meanwhile they're acting like total jerks and being totally disrespectful and rude just because it's a cop. We can't win that way. I think everybody needs to film cops when there's an incident going on, but do it respectfully, and don't just do it just to film cops. Don't just follow cops around. That's just, but to each his own. My other issue that I had was, well, my wife reminded me of a couple this morning. I've had lots of issues with cops. We got pulled over driving camping one time a while back, and I had I had a film container full of cannabis and no lid for it. And the cop pulled over the guy I was with for speeding. It was my wife's nephew. We were going camping. It smelled like weed. I let him search my bag. I probably shouldn't have. I forgot that there was mushrooms in there. So he took mushrooms. He said I was arrested for a felony. I didn't know that at the time. I forgot I had them. But I also had a bunch of Ativan in there because I was really stressed at the time. Some anxiolytic, for stress. And anyway, I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but the cop had me out of the car, wrote him a ticket for speeding, but then he took my mushrooms, said I was getting arrested for a felony, but he said he was going to let me go because he didn't want to take me to jail there so I could still enjoy my camping trip. I kind of begged and pleaded and made him feel guilty. I was like, this is ridiculous. I need those pills, basically. I was like, I'm already stressed, and at that time I was quite stressed. He ended up giving me the pills back and even said, well, you can probably get more weed at the next exit because there's people that always sell it. 2 exits up, I went to a gas station at 1 in the morning or midnight or so, got out of my car to fill up the gas and said, anybody got any weed? And some random dude was like, meet me around back, and I was able to buy some pot. The officer was doing his job, but once he knew me, he felt guilty about it. That's the thing. If you want a cop to respect you, even if you're doing something wrong, you have to be respectful to the cop. can't just say, oh, fuck you, man, you're just out here trying to harass me. It's not going to help your cause at all. We all need to be cordial and respectful. So my wife reminded me of a story this morning about a couple of years ago when she was driving to work, and she was in the left lane, and a cop just came up way fast behind her. Not to pull her over, but to get by. And it took her a minute to get over because there was somebody in the other lane, and so she kind of went up, you know, it took her a minute and she got over. The cop jumps over behind her and pulls her over. She gets pulled over and the cop says, I pulled you over because you're making me look bad in front of the other drivers. I mean, needless to say, I mean, that was obviously, you know, the cop's ego issue. But, I mean, really, you're going to tell somebody that when you pull them over? So I'm not going to go through all my cop stories. I just want to tell you the last one that my wife reminded me of this morning. When we met, I worked at a gas station, and she worked at a restaurant called Banning's in the Portland area. And it was right next door to each other, and so we went out to dinner. We just started, we'd been dating a while. We got an apartment together, and we went to Banning's for dinner one night, and we left and went home. Well, apparently what had happened is somebody who was parked right next to us had lost their PDA or something. I think it was like a PDA or one of the early versions of a, you know, personal little device, or I don't even know what it was because they didn't really specify. But apparently they had set it on the back of their car and it was gone. They went in the restaurant and asked, you know, because my wife had worked there. They said, oh yeah, that Michelle works there, and they were in the, you know, the car parked next to them. Somehow they knew we were parked next to them. So it's 1 in the morning, and we get this knock at the door in our apartment. It's a couple cops. They said that, well, somebody thinks that you may have taken their, you know, little computer or whatever, or notebook or something, and you know, can we come in and take a look around? It's like, fuck no, you can't come in. I was like, well, what's the deal? And they're like, well, they think you took it. And my wife and I were like, well, we didn't take it. Well, I'm sorry, you know, we didn't even know what the hell they were talking about. Rather than these cops come up and say, hey, did you see anything or did you hear anything? No, they're accusing us and demanding to come into our house. You know, I've had cops ask to come into my house. I've had cops come to my door and try to intimidate me or make me feel like I have to say something or let them, you know. You don't. If you want to, if police, I would just say to the people, respect police. As long as they're respectful to you. But understand their games too. We all know that they play the good guy, bad guy crap, and that the cops will always pretend to be your friend until they find some way to bust you. But really, this is, it's not about hating cops. It's about trying to get people to come together and understand that we have to make it work. The last issue I should cover now is the militarization of police, because I do not believe that police forces need giant battering ram tanks and full body armor for going into a guy's house who has a bag of weed, or, you know, the cases of abuse of force and overuse of force by SWAT teams is so well known now. I mean, when I think back to when I was a kid, you know, the SWAT team might show up with a little truck and a few guys, you know, to a hostage situation or something. And now if somebody's, you know, growing a couple pot plants, they got the whole goddamn police force down there. And it happens even when a guy gets pulled over, and, you know, it's like there's 20 cop cars. When I was about 16, I had this friend named Alex, and she lived up in Lake Grove, which was about 4 miles from my house in downtown Lake Oswego. I went to her house one night, and we hung out. We were chilling, smoking a joint, had a glass of wine, just talking about life, and then I had to go home, and so I walked home. It was about 1 in the morning, and I was maybe 8 blocks from my house. And a cop pulls up, you know. And I'm like, I'm just going home, officer. I was at a friend's house. She needed somebody to talk to. And lo and behold, another cop car shows up, and then another. And I said, look, I live right down the street. You know who I am. You know, they knew my mom. I mean, it was like, I'm just going back to my house. No, they wouldn't let it go. They ended up having 4 cop cars there, and then they cuffed me and took me down to City Hall, which was about 2 blocks from there. And I sat in this white room because I was out after curfew. When my mom showed up, she ripped them a new asshole. She's like, what the hell? You calling me at 1 in the morning to wake me up to come pick up my kid just because he's walking home? Just let him fucking walk home, you know? And the cops were just preposterously ridiculous at that point. But my mom always had my back when it came to the cops. She was a reserve officer. She was a cop for a little while. And so was my aunt. But, you know, I would never want to be a cop in today's world. It's almost like I have a... If I thought that being a police officer was really what it represented, I might even consider it. Because we need more fair-minded people out there. I mean, that's just making an assumption about my own mind. So, anyhow, this turned into a long video about cops. I didn't realize it would be 30 minutes, but I think it's an important issue. And I hope I covered it as much as possible. We got to be kind to one another. That includes people to cops and cops to people. But we can't be taken advantage of. If police are going to continue to abuse power, then the people are going to rise up. And, you know, militias may be necessary down the line, you know. It's like, maybe that's why militias are so important, you know, because if the shit really hits the fan, the police and the military are going to run for the hills to protect their own families. And that's when you'll need local militias to protect your own area. But, of course, that brings out the crazies, too. Back when police walked the beat, they knew the people. When they walked the beat, they knew the community, their neighbors, even the little troublemakers, you know. It wasn't about trying to catch them and get them in trouble. It was about saying, hey, we're keeping an eye out, you know. I know you can do better, kind of thing, you know, because kids don't want to be criminals. Kids don't want to grow up to be, you know, corrupt. They just want to have the chance to grow up. And if we're throwing people in prison because they get high once, it's not going to help the situation. It makes it worse. Sending people to jail and the prison system is a completely separate story, which the police are basically just pawns in this giant prison scheme, which is raking in, you know, billions in the private sector. And the more people in prison, the more money's made for that sector. And that's very damaging to our society. I mean, America has more people in jail than any other country, Western country, by far. And so I'll just leave it there. It's already a long video. Have a wonderful day, everybody, and take care of each other. Peace. Thanks for coming to Carpo's channel, yo. Yeah.